Last time I was here, one of the members, one of our worthy adversaries of Civitas, said to me that he wished I would act like a preacher. So let me begin my testimony today, not with words from this century, but words spoken by one of our state's most gifted leaders, who was a Lincoln Republican and an African-American preacher of the AME Zion Church, who helped lead the fusion movement in North Carolina between blacks and whites who sought to turn this state from its ugly and unjust history of slavery, discrimination, and degradation towards the path of freedom and justice. Standing on the floor of the Constitutional Convention in 1868, the Reverend J.W. Hood, a Lincoln Republican who was a leader of the Reconstruction Legislature, who would later become president of Livingstone College and Grand Master of my fraternity, Prince Hall Masons, said these words: "Gentlemen of the convention, there has never been before, and there never would probably be so again, a important assemblage of colored people of North Carolina as the present in its influence upon the destinies of all people for all time to come. Let us have faith, let us have patience, let us have moderation, yet assert always that we want three things. First, the right to give evidence in the court. Second, the right to be represented in the jury box. And third, the right to put votes in the ballot box. These rights we want, these rights we will contend for, and these rights under God we will ultimately have." Reverend Hood knew the Bible. And he swore upon the same Bible that you swore on to uphold the oath of the Constitution. And that Bible says in Isaiah 10, "Woe unto those who rob the poor of their rights." With clarity and commitment and character, Reverend Hood stood boldly and helped write a North Carolina Constitution that would not be maligned with discrimination, inequalities, and the vestiges of white supremacy. Article 1 of that Constitution says all political power is vested in and derived from the people. Section 5 says every citizen of this state owes paramount allegiance to the Constitution and the government of the United States, and no law or ordinance of the state can be in contravention or subversion of the United States Constitution, and it can have no binding force. Section 10 says all elections must be free. Section 11 says as political rights and privileges are not dependent or modified by property, no property qualifications shall affect the right to vote or the right to hold office. Section 19 says no person shall be denied equal protection under the law, nor shall any person be subjected to discrimination by the state because of race, color, religion, or national origin. The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution says that persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of are citizens of the United States, and no state, none, shall make or enforce any law that shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive persons of life, liberty, and property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws. 15th Amendment, passed in 1870, 2 years after our own state constitution was passed, says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied, but they added one word, or abridged, which means nothing can be put into place, nothing can be done to subvert or suppress, abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, and that the Congress shall have power to enforce this. The 24th Amendment of the United States adds to this resistance to abridgment any attempt to curtail, truncate, diminish, or cut citizens' rights. The 24th Amendment says the right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or other election for president, vice president, for electors for president, or senators or representative Congress shall not be denied, and then again that same word, abridged, by the United States or any state by reason of failure to pay any kind of poll tax or other tax, and the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article. 2 years after the March on Washington, in the middle of the Second Reconstruction, faced literally with the blood sacrifice of whites and blacks and Jews and Christians and so many others fighting to undo the legalized system of Jim Crow, systems that had been put in place in the late 1800s to stop the first Reconstruction. Through a powerful, broad black and white fusion coalition, this nation was forced over against white supremacists and strong regressive forces to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act was an act to enforce the provisions of the 15th Amendment and ensure that no federal, state, or local government may in any way, impede people from registering to vote or voting because of their race or their ethnicity. This act, interestingly enough, was introduced in the Senate Bill 1564 by Mike Mansfield, a Democrat, and Everett Dickerson, a Republican, on March 18, 1965, 11 days after the brutal beatings that the whole world saw on March 7th on Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama at the Edmonds-Pettus Bridge. And when the Senate voted, the vote was 77 to 19 among Democrats. 19 Democrats voted against the Voting Rights Act. But among Republicans, it was 30 to 2. Only 2 Republicans voted against the Voting Rights Act. 94.6% of Senate Republicans voted for the Voting Rights Act. Now, I raise those things because we are committed to 5 principles, which we will never turn from, and we have raised those in this particular House over and over and over again. Economic sustainability and ending poverty, fighting for full employment, living wages, and the alleviation of disparate unemployment, a green economy, labor rights, affordable housing, targeted empowerment zones, green economy, strong safety nets for the poor, fair policies for immigrants, and infrastructure development, and fair tax reform. Number 2, we are here and we come to this body because we want to see educational equality, ensuring that every child receives a high quality, well-funded, constitutional, diverse public education. Health care for all by ensuring access to Affordable Health Care Act, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and providing for environmental protection. Fairness in the criminal justice system, addressing the continuing inequalities in the system and providing equal protection under the law for black, brown, and poor white people. And our 5th goal is voting rights by defending the right to vote and expanding voting rights for all people, standing against any suppression tactics such as voter ID, restrictions of early voting, race-based redistricting, or any other effort that undermines, denies, or abridges or undermines the promise of equal protection under the law. What is our concern here is that the preponderance of the policies you are promoting is eerily reminiscent of Old South policies. For example, in this General Assembly now, for your attack on Medicaid that denies average coverage to 500,000 poor people, some of them Republicans, some of them Democrat. Your attack on the unemployment that hurts 150,000 families, some of them Democrats, some of them Republicans, some of them rural, some of them urban. Denies $700 million to the unemployed. Your disdain for immigrants, the defunding of public education, setting up new forms of privatization through charters and vouchers, which will lead to more regional segregation, and your decision during Holy Week to crucify voting rights. You've launched an all-out war on voting. Your voter suppression tactics make it harder to vote, while at the same time you are making it easier to get guns. And this combination is almost identical to the policy directions of the white Southern strategy that was used by Richard Nixon, developed by Kevin Phillips in the 1960s. It looks like and feels like and sounds like the interposition and nullification policies of George Wallace with a 21st century twist. And is this how the leadership of this General Assembly wants to be known? As being on the wrong side of history, the wrong side of democracy, the wrong side of the Constitution? My friends, this issue is not about polls. It's not about Civitas polls. It's not about feelings. Your own leader has said it's not even about voter fraud on national TV, the Speaker of the House. It's not about how you feel. It's not about political majorities. This issue is about the Constitution. And we've already fought these issues. America's already moved forward. And it's sad for us to want to go backward. Do you not know or understand that when this Republican-led General Assembly seeks to push poll taxes disguised as voter ID, and curtail same-day voter registration, and eliminate Sunday voting,
Mr. Chairman.
and add qualifications and burdens to the formerly incarcerated, and draw racially designed redistricting maps, and in any way attempt to block or suppress the rights to vote for all North Carolinians, it not only stinks of constitutional and voting rights violation, it also reveals what one of your own, a Republican, General Colin Powell, called the shameful dark vein of intolerance. You have become something other than Republicans. Your party pushed through the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And what we need in North Carolina is not old South legislative logic pouring into the new wineskin of 21st century regressive extremism. We do not need an attempt to grab power, an attempt to steal and suppress the vote, cutting insurance for the poorest among us. Instead, what we should be doing, and what we believe from our expert opinion, enforce universal compliance with the 14th, 15th, and 24th Amendment of the Constitution and the voting rights. Maintain the best laws in the nation, signature attestation combined with a 5-year felony and a charge for lying. Stop race-based gerrymandering and redistricting which disenfranchises black and minority voters. Enforce the North Carolina Constitution requirement that all elections be free. Improve early voting by opening polls on more Saturdays than Sundays. Open countywide voting centers on election day with same-day registration. Felony enfranchisement after people have paid their debt to society. And release the Help American Vote Act monies to allow for smoother election. Make automatic registration on 18th birthday like the draft, and make the election day a state holiday. North Carolina has the best election laws in the country. It protects access, security, it keeps them in balance. One of the key features of our law is voter attestation with a felony penalty for lying. And interesting, when you talk about compromise, in 2003, that was a compromise. A compromise between Mickey Mashaw, who sits to my left, and Representative Paul Stam of Apex, a Democrat and a Republican, in 2003 sponsored the bipartisan legislation with the provision for signature attestation. Says voters have to attest who they are by signing their name when they vote, and there's a felony charge against them if they lie. This simple procedure works. It has been working for decades. It is not broken. Your own admittance, and the admittance of much research, is that there is no voter fraud. We've had elections in 237 years in North Carolina without a so-called voter ID, 237 years. And only after the massive turnout of African Americans, Latinos, progressive whites, students, and the elderly fundamentally changing the electorate in the South did the false witness and distortion about fraud begin, and the cry for voter poll tax disguised as voter ID. It is those of you pushing this bill are scared of true democracy, scared of your narrow agenda may not be successful if all of us vote. Let the people vote. You won with the people voting. Let the people vote. Since 2004, as I close, North Carolina has had the greatest increase of voter participation in the nation. So to say that North Carolina should be like other states like Georgia or Indiana makes no sense. I went to Georgia last week, Augusta, by the way. My grandmother's from Georgia. And the citizens there contradicted the claims of the Secretary of State, Bryant Kemp, he claimed here last week. People in Georgia say photo ID requirements have been hard on voters. They note the large number of people who cast provisional ballots, who never return with the proper ID. If one person's vote is denied in this democracy, it is a violation of everything we hold true. The same is true in the Indiana case. The Supreme Court did not give broad approval for voter ID laws. Indiana's voter ID costs $10 million, even though when they were pushing it, the legislature said it would only cost $700,000. And they did not present one case of voter fraud in that case that would have been prevented by voter ID. And when we go to court on this, the facts in North Carolina are much different than in Indiana. And so this new poll tax, disguised as voter ID, wants to require people without driver's license, mainly the poor, the early disabled, to obtain. We believe it violates the principles of the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, the 24th Amendment. Our experts say, I say it again for emphasis, that's what an expert does. The experts say that it will cost 50 to 100% for transportation, time. And by the way, you all didn't interrupt anybody else, so please respect me too. It will cost 50 to 150% for transportation time, waiting in line, and gathering documentation. That is a poll tax. And it is wrong for these loyal citizens who are disproportionate people of color, seniors, and women who may have changed their name, people who may not have birth certificates from this state, to be affected in this way. African Americans are 22% of all active voters, but they are 31% of the registered voters who do not have a North Carolina photo ID. Seniors are 18% of active voters, but 26% of those without a North Carolina photo ID. Women are 54% of active voters, but 66% of those without North Carolina photo ID. And we do not fall for the we need voter ID for prescription drugs, to use a credit card to fly a plane. We know why we need it for Sudafed, because people use it to make Met, and you're not going to make Met by voting. Secondly, we also know that these things are a privilege. Voting is a constitutional right, protected by more constitutional amendments than any other rights we have as Americans. We as a nation don't provide constitutional rights based on false analysis and polls or popular thinking. Constitutional rights are given to keep the majority from exercising tyranny over the minority. And so we come here today to say that when we talk about voter suppression and voter ID, we are leading this state down a dangerous path. We have already fought these battles. What we should be focused on is economic sustainability, poverty, jobs, education equality for all, health care for all, dealing with the proven disparities in our criminal justice system, and protecting and expanding the voting rights of all people. This, and only this, should be the goal of any legislative body, and anything else is an affront to every claim of justice that we hold dear. And we will fight any attempt to undermine the rights ordained by God and guaranteed in our Constitution. I thank you for this respectful time and pray God's speed upon you in your deliberations.